They told me I wasn't ready, not ready to sit with the family, not ready to take my place at the table, not ready to be seen as their equal. Those words should have stung less by now. I'd heard them my entire life, but that night, the night of my cousin's engagement party, those words hit like a knife. I stood there in the banquet hall, perfectly dressed, perfectly polite, but perfectly invisible. My parents had made sure of it. They smiled at the cameras, toasted champagne with my siblings, welcomed business partners like royalty, and left me standing in the shadows. "You'll understand one day," my father whispered, smiling for the photographers. "For now, just stay out of the frame." But I understood more than he ever imagined. That night, as the speeches echoed through the hall, I made myself a promise. I would never beg for a seat at their table again. Instead, I'd build my own, bigger, brighter, and when the time came, they would choke on the silence they'd forced me into and trust me. That day came. My name is Lucas. I'm the middle child of the Alvarez family, at least. The forgotten one. My father, Victor Alvarez, is a man obsessed with appearances. Old money, old rules, old expectations. He built his empire not just on business, but on how perfectly he could control the story of our family. My mother, Celeste, was worse. A socialite turned queen bee. She lived for the spotlight, for the gossip magazines, for being the kind of woman whispered about in charity galas. She raised my siblings like heirlooms, polished, protected, displayed. And then there was me. My older brother, Damien, was the golden child. Tall, handsome, trained to inherit everything. My younger sister, Isabella, was the darling, the princess who could do no wrong. Me. I was the creative one, which in my family was just a polite way of saying useless. I loved writing. I loved music. I loved standing on a stage and watching a story come alive. But in the Alvarez family, art wasn't a legacy. It was a liability. "Lucas, you waste too much time," my father would sigh as if my very existence drained his fortune. "Lucas, no one pays bills with poems," my mother would add, sipping wine. "Lucas, you're just not ready to be seen with us yet." My brother would joke and everyone would laugh, but it wasn't funny. At dinners, my seat was always just out of the main circle. At events, I was introduced last, if at all. On holidays, my gifts were practical ties I never wore, watches I never wanted, while Damien and Isabella received heirlooms, trust funds, promises of land. There's a cruelty in being excluded, but there's a special cruelty in being excluded publicly. The worst came during that engagement party for my cousin Sophia, a grand affair at the Ritz. Chandeliers glittered, violins played, champagne poured like water. I showed up on time, dressed in a suit that had cost me 3 months of freelance pay, and still, when the family gathered for the photos, I heard it. "Not yet, Lucas," my mother said, her manicured hand brushing me aside. "You'll have your moment when you're ready," my father added. As if readiness was a thing I hadn't bled for. That was when I realized something. They would never see me as ready. Not until I broke the rules. Not until I did something they couldn't ignore. I learned to read their faces like weather. When donors arrived, my mother practiced warmth that never reached her eyes. When business partners came, my father wore a measured silence. I performed small courtesies, applause for others' victories, polite praise for heirloom gifts, feigned interest in conversations about land and law. Teachers called me sensitive, and the label felt like a quiet sentence. My violin recitals earned nods while my father checked his phone. Damon's graduations were gala nights. My own achievements were footnotes. The Alvarez name carried rules very well: manage estates, preserve appearances. I did not fit their brushstroke. My choices were messy and loud in a house that treasured silence and polish. So when my mother brushed me aside at Sophia's engagement, it wasn't a single insult. It was every small dismissal stitched into one. The orchestra swelled, and I felt the music like a pulse against my ribs. I smoothed my lapel, swallowed a tremble, and smiled. Not surrender calculation. I stopped waiting. I began cataloging slights, saving them like a ledger of quiet fuel dot, so I smiled, clapped, and laughed with them. Behind the smile, I quietly began keeping score and planning dot. The betrayal came 3 weeks later. I had been working on a project in secret, a script part memoir, part fiction woven with pieces of my life they never wanted told. The neglect, the favoritism, the small humiliations that built into a pattern. I sent it to a producer friend, half expecting silence. Instead, he called me at midnight. "Lucas, this is it. This is your shot. Come meet me tomorrow." For the first time in years, I felt seen, but my family found out. My brother Damien cornered me in the study. His voice was flat. "You really think anyone cares about your little play?" My father listened from the doorway and said, "You'll embarrass us. The Alvarez name doesn't belong in cheap theaters." My mother smiled like sunlight on glass and said, "Be sensible. You're not ready." This time they didn't just speak. They acted. The next day, the producer called. "Lucas, I don't know what happened. Investors are pulling out. Sponsors backed away." He sounded defeated. I did not need him to spell it out. I knew the name on the other end of those calls, the measured baritone of my father, the honeyed voice of my mother, a brother's quiet threats. Isabella floated rumors like paper boats and watched them sink. They had sabotaged me, again, that night. I locked the apartment and let the city hum below me. I cried until my throat burned, not loud but deep, the kind of grief that digs its fingers into the ribs. I stared at the manuscript and thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I was only ever going to be the family's footnote. Then I remembered the engagement party, the photograph where my mother's hand pushed me back, the way the photographer angled Damien into the center, the hush that followed whenever I tried to tell a joke. Each memory hardened into something practical, evidence, not emotion. Hurt became a map. I did not rage. I did not storm through their doors or brandish accusations. Anger is loud and obvious. It gives people time to prepare. I chose something quieter. I chose to be methodical. First, I cataloged every slight, every whispered dismissal. Names, dates, locations. Proof is patient. Then I moved outward. I rewrote the script until it sang. The personal turned universal. The wounds turned into hooks that anyone could latch onto. I scrubbed identifying names but left fingerprints. A broken fountain in a family garden. A missing ring, a photograph with a torn corner. The story would sting for those who knew. It would fascinate everyone else. I also began to build resources. I took small freelance work, saved obsessively, opened accounts under careful names, and consulted a lawyer who specialized in entertainment and privacy. She asked the right questions and warned me of legal traps. She kept my files. Parallel to logistics, I cultivated allies, a festival director who resented the Alvarezes, an accountant who'd been cheated out of fees, a former assistant with phone numbers and receipts. People who held grievances kept quiet records. They offered phone numbers and receipts. Silence became a tool. My mother left voicemails that I never returned. Damien sent threats that I read and then deleted. I smiled at family dinners and kept my face blank like stage makeup. Let them think they'd won. Let them believe I had crumpled into their narrative. Under that revenge isn't loud. It's patient. The first step was money. If they thought art was worthless, I'd show them otherwise. I took the script they had tried to bury and rewrote it into something bigger, darker, sharper. I cut away the small, sentimental lines and sharpened the edges until the story moved like a blade. I removed family names and replaced them with details. so precise that anyone who knew the house would feel the sting. Streaming platform had launched a new initiative for original voices. I sent the script under a pseudonym, no Alvarez, no pedigree, just a voice. The script landed in the right inbox, and astonishingly, they loved it. Within a month, there was an offer. Within 3 months, a team assembled. Within 6 months, a premiere date was set. Money followed enough to change the ledger and make silence an expensive thing. Step 2 was silence. I severed the easy threads. No calls, no small talk, no passive-aggressive texts. At family dinners, I was the perfect background ornament smiles, small talk, the road appreciation for the roast. When my father asked, as he always did, "What are you doing with your life?" I'd practice the answer until it sounded humble. "Oh, nothing important." Let them underestimate me. Let them glow. I chose absence as a cloak, but silence had to be strategic. I cultivated channels that ran under their radar, anonymous submissions, hidden bank accounts, a lawyer with a soft voice and an appetite for clean contracts. I met people in nondescript cafes and traded papers over coffee. I learned how to accept funds in ways that didn't trace back to my name. The plan was infrastructure, not fury. It was ordinary and brilliant. The third step was influence. If I could not change their minds, I could change the audience. I fed small rumors to journalists, careful, factual things that hinted at larger scandals without offering proof. I whispered to a festival director who disliked my father's patronage. I reminded a program manager of a small, unpaid invoice they'd never resolved. People with grudges are useful. They have records. They had numbers and dates I could use without revealing myself. Meanwhile, I polished the public story. The script became a mirror, not a confession. It reflected patterns: a family garden with a rotted fountain, a necklace that went missing after a fight, a photograph with a corner torn out. For those who had been wounded, the images were recognition. For new eyes, the details read like cinema. I hired a dramaturg who suggested changes that made the plot meaner, and a lawyer who kept me safe. Then came logistics, venue bookings, press lists, curated guest lists. I negotiated a premiere at a festival known to attract press with teeth. I booked panels and a tasteful gala after the screening, a place where the right cameras and the wrong faces would meet. Money opened doors. Anonymity kept the hinges from creaking. The most delicious part of the plan was the invitation list. I had the names printed on heavy cardstock: my father, my mother, Damien, Isabella, each name centered and authoritative. I sent gilded invitations and a promise of professional courtesy. I told the press the Alvarezes would attend as supporters of the arts. My parents loved that phrasing. They accepted. They RSVP'd and arranged outfits. I played my role perfectly. I let them think I was broken. At dinners, I laughed when they laughed. I tolerated their jibes. I deferred to their opinions on wine and politics. They watched the son they deemed useless nod along, and they leaned back with satisfied smiles. That complacency was a tool. For months, I moved like a shadow through both worlds, family and industry. I collected allies who liked seeing power checked, who saw art as a weapon and a mirror. I spent nights learning how to set the stage that would make the reveal inevitable: a festival screen, a host who knew to ask the right questions, a post-premiere gala where cameras would catch every expression. When everything was ready, I folded the final contracts into a neat packet and signed my name with a hand that felt steady for the first time in years. The plan was not about revenge as revenge. It was about reclamation. I wanted a voice, a ledger, a record. I would not be cruel without cause. I wanted them to feel, in public, the consequence of what they had done in private, and then I waited. Patience had become my ally. I had traded the noise of confrontation for the slow burn of an unraveling. The curtain would rise soon enough. I rehearsed smiling for cameras and answering questions with calm precision. The silence I had cultivated would speak at last with purpose. The night arrived. The theater glittered with lights, cameras and journalists buzzing with anticipation. Guests in tuxedos and gowns mingled, champagne glasses clinking. My family swept in with their usual pageantry, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, basking in attention they hadn't earned. They sat in the front row, radiant in the illusion of control, but illusions don't last. The host stepped onto the stage, smiling toward the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate a groundbreaking new voice. A writer whose story is raw, unflinching, unforgettable. Please welcome Lucas Alvarez. The room stilled. A collective gasp cut through the silence. I stepped into the light. The cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. In the front row, my mother's smile faltered. My father's jaw tightened. Damien muttered something under his breath. They hadn't expected me. They hadn't imagined I could ever be the one center stage. I adjusted the microphone and spoke, steady and deliberate. For years, I was told I wasn't ready. Not ready to sit with my family. Not ready to be seen. Tonight, I signed a $1.5 million deal. And tonight, you'll hear the story they never wanted told. The audience erupted with applause. And then the lights dimmed. The screen came alive. Scene after scene unfolded. A boy excluded from the dinner table. A teenager mocked at parties. A son erased from photographs. It was fiction thinly veiled, but to anyone who knew, it was truth carved into celluloid. The neglect, the favoritism, the cruelty. All of it lay bare in the language of cinema. The crowd began to murmur. Heads turned. Eyes landed on my parents, on Damien, on Isabella. My mother's face went chalk white. My father's fists curled tight against his knees. Isabella's lips trembled. Damien hissed curses under his breath, but the screen drowned him out. They couldn't stop it now. By the time the credits rolled, the theater shook with applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, whistling. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. I was pulled into interviews, congratulated, hailed as the festival star, and behind me, my family slipped out through the side doors, shrunken shadows of the titans they once pretended to be. No cameras followed them. No hands reached out to shake theirs. Their legacy was unraveling, live, in front of everyone they had spent a lifetime trying to impress. That night, the story didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. In the days that followed. Their downfall was swift. Every news outlet seized the story. Their carefully polished image cracked, and through the fractures spilled every hidden cruelty. Old associates distanced themselves. Former friends whispered in disgust. Donations to their charities evaporated overnight.